February 1943. A Spitfire claws its way to 18,000 feet above the English Channel, engine snarling, wings trembling in air so cold it feels brittle. Inside the cockpit, the pilot's breath becomes a weapon against him. Warm moisture rises, meets the Canopies' frozen skin, and in seconds the clear world turns to milk. He can't see the horizon. He can't see the enemy. He can't even see his own wingman. He rolls hard left on instinct, because instincts are all that exist when you're blind, and nearly rams another Spitfire that appears out of the fog like a ghost. Somewhere below, the sea is waiting, dark and indifferent. That week, 3 RAF pilots die without taking a single round of enemy fire. Their cause of death isn't bullets. It's blindness. The men flying Fighter Command have a name for it: the White Death. Not poetic, just accurate. You can't dogfight what you can't see. You can't escort bombers through cloud if your own canopy turns opaque mid-climb. You can't read instruments, can't track a target, can't even bail out safely if you've lost all orientation. The standard answer is simple: crack the canopy. Let the slipstream rush in and clear the fog. And it does, instantly. But what you gain in visibility, you pay back in flesh. At 300 miles an hour, an open canopy turns the cockpit into a wind tunnel. The temperature drops below zero in moments. Fingers stiffen until they can't squeeze a trigger or feather a prop. Frost crawls across oxygen masks. Pilots return with faces raw and swollen, eyes bloodshot, lips cracked, speech slurred from cold shock. Ground crews wrap them in blankets and walk them, half-dragging, to the medical tent. Flight surgeons record it as exposure. Command records it as acceptable. But the numbers don't lie. Between December 1942 and March 1943, Fighter Command logs dozens of incidents tied to canopy fogging and disorientation, mid-air collisions, controlled flight into terrain, aborted intercepts, missed kills, bombers slipping through because the fighters meant to stop them simply couldn't stay oriented long enough to fight. And the Luftwaffe notices. German pilots learned to bait Spitfires into climbs and vertical turns in freezing weather, then vanish into cloud edges, waiting for the British to lose their reference. It isn't a clever tactic. It's exploitation. Fog the canopy, and the enemy will defeat himself. At Farnborough and the Royal Aircraft Establishment, engineers try to solve it the proper way. Anti-fog pastes smear into greasy haze. Heated glass cracks. Ventilation ducts ice shut. Every solution adds weight, complexity, and failure points. None of it holds up under combat conditions where pilots are breathing hard, sweating under layers, and climbing into air that can kill skin in seconds. So pilots adapt the only way pilots can. They breathe shallow. They tilt their heads, hunting for clear patches like men looking through cracks in a wall. They memorize instrument layouts so they can fly by touch when sight fails. It's courageous. It's resourceful. It's also insane. At RAF Tangmere, a maintenance officer named Peter Holloway watches the pattern repeat. Aircraft return with pilots shaking, half-frozen, and angry, not at the enemy, but at their own canopy. Holloway isn't a designer. He isn't a university engineer with a drafting office. He's a career ground man who started as a rigger and worked his way into hydraulics, fuel systems, airworthiness. One of those quiet people who keep squadrons alive by preventing small failures from becoming catastrophic ones. He starts asking questions that sound almost childish until you realize no one else is asking them. Why does the canopy fog? Because warm, wet cockpit air hits cold glass. Why is the air wet? Because pilots exhale water vapor. Why doesn't it vent? Because the cockpit is effectively sealed for aerodynamic reasons. So why not leave a gap? Because open canopies create drag, turbulence, and hypothermia. Every fix creates a new problem. The logic loops like a trap. Holloway suspects the real enemy isn't the cold itself, or even the moisture. It's stagnation, air that sits still long enough to saturate and condense. And once he sees it that way, the problem stops looking like chemistry and starts looking like physics. He walks the flight line at dawn and watches canopies slide open and closed. He notices frost forming along rails, thin lines where cold metal meets warmer air. Boundaries, thresholds, places where the system breaks first. He begins sketching in the margins of his maintenance notebook. Not blueprints, ideas. What if instead of fighting temperature, you controlled airflow? What if you introduced a calculated leak, small enough to avoid turning the cockpit into a freezer, but enough to keep air moving across the glass. Not a heater, not a fan, not a new canopy, just a controlled draft. He takes the idea to his commanding officer and gets the answer bureaucracy always gives. The canopy design is approved. Modifications require Air Ministry authorization. Unauthorized alterations can be a court-martial offense. If he wants to propose a change, there's a process. Forms, committees, trials, months. Holloway nods, thanks him, and leaves. Because Holloway also knows what months mean. More fog, more collisions, more funerals. A problem that kills in silence is still a problem that kills. And Holloway has spent 15 years learning one brutal truth. If you wait for perfect permission in wartime, you bury men while you wait. So he decides to do the one thing no manual recommends. He's going to prove it first. He selects a Spitfire that's already grounded for hydraulic work, an aircraft that won't fly for a few days, giving him time and cover. After dark, when the hangar is quiet and the usual eyes are gone, Holloway works alone with small tools, a jeweler's saw, files, a strip of aluminum. His idea is surgical, a narrow slot along the canopy base behind the windscreen, paired with a tiny internal deflector to guide incoming slipstream upward across the canopy's inner surface. A moving curtain of air, fast enough that moisture can't settle, steady enough that the pilot won't be blasted by it. A quarter-inch change that could decide whether a man lives long enough to fight. When he's done, the modification is almost invisible. Unless you know exactly where to look, you'd never notice it. And that's deliberate. If it fails, he can remove it. If it works, he can't keep it hidden for long. Because the war doesn't care about regulations. It only cares about what works. The modified Spitfire sits on the hardstand at Tangmere, looking no different from the others. Same elliptical wings. Same Merlin engine. Same cold February wind biting across the dispersal hut. Only one thing has changed. A quarter-inch gap, hidden along the canopy rail. Holloway doesn't advertise it. He doesn't even write it down. In the maintenance log, the aircraft shows hydraulic repairs and a routine inspection. Nothing more. If this goes wrong, the paper trail must stay clean. What he needs now isn't theory. He needs proof in the sky. He finds it in Flight Lieutenant James Cartwright, 24 years old, 62 sorties flown, and recently grounded twice. Not by enemy fire, but by cold exposure. Cartwright isn't reckless. He isn't loud. He's the kind of pilot who survives by precision. But lately precision hasn't been enough. Twice his canopy has fogged solid in climb. Twice he's cracked it open and nearly lost control as freezing slipstream tore through the cockpit. He listens while Holloway explains. Air stagnates. Moisture condenses. Keep it moving, and it won't settle. Cartwright runs his hand along the rail and feels the slot. Smooth. Clean. Intentional. Has it been tested? Not in flight. Is it authorized? No. Cartwright studies the aircraft again. He has buried friends in the past month. Men who vanished into cloud and never came out. He nods once. I'll take her up. The next morning is perfect for failure. Humidity high at ground level. Forecast -30 at altitude. The kind of day that turns canopies opaque before you clear the coast. Cartwright straps in. Engine start. Gauge is steady. Taxi clearance. The Spitfire rolls forward and lifts cleanly into gray sky. Holloway watches through binoculars, jaw tight. At 5,000 feet, Cartwright keeps the canopy closed and breathes normally. No shallow breathing tricks. No head tilting. 10,000 feet. A faint haze appears along the upper arc, then dissolves. 15,000 feet. The cold creeps in, but only slightly. Not the brutal knife of an open canopy. Just a controlled draft brushing his shoulder. 20,000 feet. He deliberately forces his breathing heavy, exaggerating condensation inside his oxygen mask. He rolls into a tight turn. Exactly the maneuver that usually triggers full fogging. Nothing. The glass remains clear. He climbs higher, runs through simulated intercept patterns, sharp banks, dives. The aircraft whistles faintly near the canopy rail, but control feel remains unchanged. No turbulence. No structural vibration. For 40 minutes, he abuses the envelope. The canopy stays clear. When he lands, he taxis straight toward Holloway without a word. Engine cut. Canopy back. Cold air rolls out. It worked. Holloway doesn't smile. He asks questions instead. At what altitude did you first feel airflow? Was there vibration? Did it change control response? Could you hear it under full power? Did the cold become distracting? Cartwright answers each one carefully. Draft noticeable, not disruptive. No buffeting. No loss of control authority. Cold tolerable, far better than open canopy. Visibility perfect. One flight isn't proof. But it's not luck either. Within days, 2 more pilots volunteer. Then 3. Word spreads quietly in the dispersal huts. Holloway's Gap, some call it. Others just ask, which one's got the fix? 5 test flights become 10. Every report is the same. Reduced fogging, manageable temperature drop, no meaningful performance penalty. One Canadian pilot, McKay, takes the modified Spitfire into a mock dogfight against an unmodified aircraft. In repeated turns, he keeps visual contact while his opponent is forced to crack his canopy mid-engagement. McKay wins 3 out of 3. He lands and says plainly, "Put it on mine." Now Holloway hesitates. Modifying one grounded aircraft is rebellion. Modifying operational fighters assigned to active pilots is something else entirely. But the pilots insist. And Holloway knows something deeper than regulation. If a fix exists and you withhold it, that's its own kind of negligence. So he works nights. 90 minutes per aircraft. Cut. File. Fit deflector. Smooth edges. Check seal integrity. Inspect frame loads. Repeat. For aircraft. Then 8. Maintenance logs show routine inspections. Nothing more. But patterns don't stay hidden long in a squadron. The engineering officer notices slight drag discrepancies during performance checks. Nothing dramatic, but measurable. He inspects one of the aircraft personally and finds the slot. He brings Holloway into his office. Who authorized this? No one. Does it work? Yes. The engineering officer studies the data, speaks to pilots, inspects the modification himself. He knows unauthorized alterations are forbidden. He also knows the fogging problem is costing lives. "I have to report this," he says quietly. "But I'll give you 48 hours to escalate it yourself." Holloway spends that night drafting a formal technical report. No excuses. No apologies. Just data. Flight profiles, temperature readings, pilot statements, airflow diagrams. 2 days later, he stands in the station commander's office expecting reprimand. Instead, 3 men wait for him. The station commander, a senior engineer from Farnborough, a wing commander from Fighter Command. They've read everything. The Farnborough engineer asks about structural stress. Holloway explains the slot avoids load-bearing frame members. Ground tests show no compromise. The wing commander asks about hypothermia risk. Holloway presents temperature comparisons. Average drop 4 degrees, significantly less than open canopy operations. The station commander asks the question that matters. Does it work in combat? Holloway hands over combat reports from pilots who have already flown operational sorties with the modification. Clear canopy. No fogging. Improved formation retention. Silence follows. Then the wing commander leans back. "We'll test it formally. 10 aircraft. 2 squadrons. Operational conditions. If results match the field data, the modification goes fleet-wide." There is a pause. If it fails, this ends your career. Holloway doesn't hesitate. If it works, he replies, it ends the fog. Within 2 weeks, 20 aircraft are modified under official supervision. Within a month, 200. Pilots stop cracking canopies mid-climb. Cold injuries drop. Disorientation incidents decline sharply. But statistics don't capture the real change. Pilots hold formation through cloud. Escorts stay with bombers longer. Intercepts succeed in winter conditions that previously forced aborts. The Luftwaffe's tactic of bait and vanish loses its edge. By summer 1943, hundreds of Spitfires carry the modification now quietly known as the Holloway Gap. Factory production lines incorporated into new builds. What began as an unauthorized cut in metal becomes official doctrine. And the men who once flew blind in winter skies now climb with clear canopies and steady hands. Not because of a new engine. Not because of a new weapon. Because one maintenance officer refused to accept condensation as inevitable. Formal testing begins immediately. 2 squadrons receive modified Spitfires and fly standard combat patrols under winter conditions. The results are unmistakable. Pilots report clear canopies at altitudes where fogging had once been inevitable. They breathe normally. They maneuver aggressively. Visibility holds. Engineers monitor airflow, temperature, and structural stress. The data confirms Holloway's theory. The narrow slot creates a constant upward stream of air along the inside of the canopy. Moisture never settles long enough to condense. The solution isn't complex. It simply works. Fighter Command orders immediate fleet-wide implementation. Maintenance crews begin modifying aircraft across England. Each installation takes less than 2 hours. Within weeks, hundreds of Spitfires carry the gap. Pilots stop flying with cracked canopies. Frostbite cases decline. Visibility-related incidents drop sharply. Sortie effectiveness improves. Pilots maintain formation in cloud. Escorts stay with bombers longer. Intercepts succeed that once failed. The change is measurable, but its true impact is quieter. Pilots who would have died now survive. Even the Luftwaffe notices. German intelligence reports that RAF fighters remain aggressive in poor visibility. Their tactics of using cloud to break contact become less reliable. They never discover why. They never suspect a quarter-inch cut made in a hangar at Tangmere. By late 1943, the modification becomes standard. Supermarine incorporates it into factory production. What began as an unauthorized experiment becomes permanent design. Holloway himself receives no ceremony. He is reassigned to technical liaison work, traveling between airfields, supervising installations. He works the same way he always has, quietly, methodically. After the war, he leaves the RAF and returns to civilian engineering. He rarely speaks about what he did, but pilots remember. At reunions, they talk about winter missions when they could finally see clearly, about the difference between blindness and control, about the maintenance officer who solved a problem no engineer had fixed. He never calls it innovation. He calls it common sense. In the RAF archives, a memo dated May 1943 recommends him for commendation. Beneath it, in handwritten ink, someone added one line. This man saw what we did not. Peter Holloway didn't design a new aircraft. He didn't invent a new weapon. He simply understood airflow and refused to accept blindness as the price of war. Because of that, thousands of pilots flew home through frozen skies with clear vision, steady hands, and a chance to survive. Sometimes, the smallest cut changes everything.